welcome everybody to Workbench Wednesday. We are live once again with Bill and Dave, and we're going to continue our part 2 of keeping on track, everything you need to know about track. So it's been 2 weeks since we were out playing. Dave, have you got anything you want to show to us, or anything you've been working on? I think you've been showing me you've been outside working.
I have been. Yeah, we had a couple nice days here in Columbus, Ohio, and got out, ran some trains. I've been working on those tunnel portals, been staining those, just got new stain yesterday. So keeping the ball rolling, looking forward to some warm weather so we can get out there for good.
Yeah, I think we were both texting back and forth. I'm running today. Hey, so am I.
Yeah, my Snapchat blows up when it's actually nice, and I'm filming my my train running around the track, which I'm sure my family loves getting those. So
yeah, and also with us we got Bill Logan. Bill, have you been running your trains outside, and your commercial displays don't count?
Oh, I was going to say I've been running everybody else's trains outside.
Yeah, I think
you
say your grandson makes you run your trains more than you run your own trains.
That is correct. Every time he comes over, can we run trains? That's how it works.
Yep. Gets everything running. So, well, we're going to continue our conversation on track, and we're going to jump right into it. Bill, what do you want to start with tonight? You gave me a script, but I haven't even looked at the outline yet.
Well, we're going to start out then on two brief topics. One, references, because we did not touch on those last time, and a few corrections. Like, the internet is great when it comes to people bringing issues up, and a few points to make there. But with regard to references, a few things, particularly for the beginners, which is what our focus is intended to provide guidance for. A couple books, and let's see, can you flip over? Let's see, I can show them this way. Yeah, there we go. Okay, I can do this. Okay. A number of years ago, Kalmbach Publishing, back through Garden Railways, produced a brief. There's about 12 pages here. As it says, Beginning Guide to Garden Railroading, which is very good. It touches on all the basic topics, and most importantly, gives you pictures for installations, a lot of graphics, and some beginning guidelines that'll get you through all the basic topics to start with. We're plowing through the issue of track here, as you've seen in this workshop, as you see in this workshop, and the one prior. But if you want to, this can still be obtained through Kalmbach Publishing. And as far as I know, they actually send these out free to interested people. Similarly, in a more involved, and this one you do have to pay for, is the Garden Railway Basics, again produced through Garden Railways a la Kalmbach Publishing. The author on that's Kevin Strong, who produced a lot of articles in Garden Railways magazine, and it goes into distinctly more in-depth and with photographs of all sorts of installation techniques, as well as just basic Garden Railway photos. Last but not least, I'm really giving Kalmbach credit here, right?
Right.
Okay. Years up to the fall of last year, there was Garden Railways magazine. They have subsequently gone digital. You can obtain a disc of all prior magazine publications of Garden Railways magazine, or you can find some previous Garden Railroaders are willing to part with some of their actual paper copies out there. Covers the entire gamut of garden railroading topics, plus also gives lists of vendors out there and how to contact them, and that's at some point just as valuable.
Yeah, I was given a collection that was about 15 years old, and I forgot that they were 15 years old. I was flipping through, and I was kind of new in the hobby, a couple of years ago, looking through these, going, wow, these prices aren't too bad. And I was like, oh yeah, these are from the 90s.
There you go. The prices never seem to go down; they always go up.
Yeah. Do we want to mention the GRE news that has replaced them?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
You got an image of that for folks?
I will here in a second.
With the somewhat demise of the paper version of Garden Railways magazine, which tended to be the glue that held a lot of Garden Railway clubs together in terms of national. There is now a new newsletter being produced, compliments of our West Coast Garden Railway clubs, in conjunction with many other clubs, including us here in Columbus, who provide information for them prior to their publication. So you can begin to see there's manufacturers data, there's individual project data, there's garden railways displayed in there. Pretty much they're attempting to touch base on all levels with regard to the hobby as a central source of information to keep us all on the same page, maybe. We'll see.
Yeah.
It's a new venture, and we're excited about it. And we recommend people in the hobby, new and not so new, check into it, please.
Yeah, and it is free, and you can go on their Facebook page, which I think is just GRE News,
Yes.
and you can download it. The one I have here is 36 pages, and there's not a single bad page on it. So it's good to see.
A lot of how-tos, a lot of how to do everything in terms of basic railroading, layout design, as well as in-depth details on individual topics, couplers, painting, weathering, I probably should say.
Yeah, making concrete houses here. There's
Structures.
lots of good stuff.
So by all means, check it out.
Yeah.
Again, we haven't. It's always good to have a news source.
Yeah. Jed, I think I was reading online today that they were up to 170 garden clubs that were subscribed to it or involved somehow, and I think 10 of those were outside the U.S. So that doesn't count individuals that have also signed up for it and part of the Facebook club. So
back on the reference category, let me go ahead and point out: don't pass up the individual major manufacturers' catalogs, which typically they put out yearly, so they keep up to date on new product introductions. Real quickly, I'll point out maybe the four majors that I routinely refer to. There's Bachmann, who, although have railroad products across all gauges, do have a large selection in the G gauge category too. They put out, and most of the time, and particularly if you get to railroad shows, the catalogs are typically free for the asking. And if not, you can always contact the companies. I don't recall of any of the companies, maybe shipping sometimes, but other than that, the catalogs are free. A lot of the major hobby shops also carry the books.
Yeah.
We have LGB, of course, LGB Markland. And what you'll find in here is not only demonstrations of individual railroad products, particularly the equipment, but certainly the rail, transformer, or the controllers, and individual components necessary to construct an entire operating railroad.
And
put the plug in for our folks at Pico.
mm-hmm.
Here we go. Nice thick catalog. And once again, a full range of extensive garden railroading product line, track, controllers, engines, accessories, and structures. They're as prolific with structures as they are with the railroad equipment itself. And for those who like contemporary equipment, of course, there's USA Trains. These are Charlie Rowe and the folks up at USA Trains have specialized in contemporary equipment. So for all you big contemporary railroader types, this is where things go in that category. Very detailed, very good operating equipment, and worth certainly the costs involved with it at this point.
Yeah, it reminds me, if you want to hold up that Bachmann catalog one more time, the photograph on there, I'm pretty sure that was Ken Patterson photograph, and he has a fantastic internet YouTube show on a weekly basis called "What's Neat This Week in Garden" or "What's Neat This Week in Model Railroading." He touches once in a while in garden railroading, but he does mostly HO. But he does fantastic photographic work. And his shows are interesting as well. There's it's a place to get some good ideas. If you look that up on YouTube, What's Neat This Week, it'll take you right there. But they put out a weekly show, and then there's another monthly show that he does for garden, or I'm sorry, I keep saying garden, model railroad hobbyists
Yes. Okay.
magazine.
Our harder core crowd.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. If you're counting rivets,
There you
that's the place to go.
go. Two quick corrections from last workshop. Our friends at Bachman did remind me that we pointed out that with their like Thomas train sets and some of their basic starter sets, they utilize a tin plate type of modular sectional track, which I don't recommend be utilized outside simply because it rusts. And they acknowledge that too, but they also point out that they do offer as an upgrade brass track like the other major manufacturers do in the sectional category. So don't again, it's listed in the catalog and it can be purchased along with many other things. So Bachman's hanging right in there with all the major suppliers when it comes to brass track in that category. The only other point, a number of people asked questions regarding last week's issues of rail clamps, which I profess are sort of the glue that holds the whole track system together. And that's the focus, of course, what we're trying to convey here. The business of rail clamps, these little metallic brass buggers here, that are the replacement for the classic sliders that routinely come with a starter set stuff. The where are we at here? There we go. Yeah, typical slider kind of connections. Great to start out with, horrible to build a garden railroad with.
Yeah.
So we recommend going to the rail clamp format. The question that people ask me, well, wait a minute, where can we get these things? Because with the exception of Pico, they're not offered in the catalogs of the major manufacturers. So right off the bat, I'll make a comment. Rail clamps are made and offered for sale by Pico. They can be purchased usually, I think, in 10 or 12 packs. AML, American Mainline, which is a sub company of AccuCraft, also offers brass rail clamps. Proline, which is a line in the United States handled by Train Lee out of Reno, Nevada, they offer a slightly different configured rail clamp that is plated and works quite well, and actually is a little easier to connect with because the connection process is from above, not from the side. And last but certainly not least, and I just checked into this today again, RLD Hobbies out of Albion, Illinois, are making or in the process of making rail clamps based off the original prototypes of the split jaw product line. And I checked with Pete today, and he says we are making them, but as fast as we make them, they're going out the door.
Yeah.
So you have to sort of get in line, I believe, when it comes to ordering issues.
Tell me about the plated rail clamps you were just mentioning. They
well, of course,
most steel with
right. They're most all the product is made with brass, which is easily platable. I believe the Proline is nickel silver plated.
Okay.
And therefore they try to get the best of both worlds. The brass rail clamps do oxidize just like the brass rail do, and that's why we recommended last week the use of the conductive grease to minimize that oxidation. And in their case, they chose to look at the plating process and to slow down the oxidation. And because there's not a lot of wear and tear once the clamp's applied, then it remains intact.
Yeah. Okay.
A lot better.
I was just curious what kind of plating was
put
on there. Okay.
So there's the two corrections. Moving on to the basic topics in. Okay, we started last time with the starter set. I want to conclude with a starter set.
If Bill, if we could jump in here, Mr. Pictovid, Andrew here has mentioned he just checked on the HLW website and it says they're out of business.
RLD Hobbies.
RLD
Hobbies out of Albion. I just talked to Pete today. They better not be.
AML clamps are for sale through RLD. Okay. Oh, maybe I'm just jumping the gun here with too many reading the
right. The original manufacturers who had the concepts down for rail clamps and had patents on them. Hillman rail clamps and split jaw rail clamps. Both they're all mom and pop operations. They're just small individual companies from those two gentlemen, and both of them have retired, and no one took up the desire to procure the patents. Well, the patents ran out, I'll say it that way. And no one was really willing to, let's say, buy those companies per se. So that's just now what you'll find. The aftermarket is there's plenty of them in the aftermarket available, so they're out there, both off a shelf as well as used. Okay.
All right.
Back to our starter set. Okay, I contend here's our starter set. Everybody tends to get this is one from Christmas. This is a Pico product. As I mentioned, you get engine, cars, a circle of track, controller, which consists of, by my definition, of course, a transformer to go from 120 volt down to lower voltage. I'll claim 18 volt. And then the controller, that's the speed controller direction determiner here. And the last piece, which I pulled out of the box, is the track connector, which I do want to talk on tonight. The ability to connect to the track along with a hunk of wire in order to run between the controller and the track itself. You'll quickly find, once you expand beyond your basic concept of a circle of track running around the house or maybe even out on the deck, by way of the starter set, and you want to start expanding more equipment, more track, actually get hardcore and get outdoors and build a garden railway, that the components, the track, the transformers, and in the case of the wire systems, are quickly discarded in most cases because they just don't suit the larger scale concept of where you're going to. And that's why we want to talk about that tonight. How to address those issues that'll quickly come to your doorstep once you decide to expand your circle of track from a starter set. The issues that we commented on with regard to the starter sets, the track radiuses are simply too short, 2-foot radius, 4-foot diameter circles, only are intended for the smaller wheelbase equipment. Anything that resembles contemporary railroads, like I mentioned, back through USA trains, we don't recommend running on these smaller radius curves.
Yeah.
The next thing you face is, as soon as you go from a single motor, which in this case, forgive me, I get into electrical discussion, is less than an amp of current draw, you get into engines like this one from USA Trains, this puppy. As soon as you want to get into contemporary railroading equipment, those transformers are absolutely useless. Will not run these pieces of equipment. They'll simply overload in less than a minute because these engines have not only a much larger weight ratio, but more importantly, they have multiple motors. And you can usually figure the rule of thumb in this hobby. Each motor, on average, is 1 amp of current draw. And so if you have an engine with 2 motors like this one, you can anticipate roughly a 2 amp draw. That transformer or controller that comes with the starter set has a capacity of 0.6 of an amp.
So,
hint, hint.
Right. Yeah, you're in a world of hurt already before you.
So one of the first things you'll wind up having to deal with is transformers. We're not going to cover transformers tonight. That's for another time. But because our focus here is track and how to get started in that regard. And we'll keep that focus until we get into the control section on another workshop time. I will give you my recommendation when you start looking for larger controllers. Look at the 5 amp categories.
Yeah.
Or you'll hear the term VA, volt amps. 120 VA, which basically is a 5 amp transformer capacity ran at 20 volts maximum output. We'll give you 120 VA.
Hey, Bill.
Yeah.
And in general, what would that run? Would that run your 2-motor engine, or would you be able to jump from one track to another and run 2 tracks at the same time with a 5
Yep.
amp?
Back to my rule of thumb. Every motor you put on the track to run simultaneously consumes a little bit less than an amp. We'll call it an amp for this discussion. So you could essentially run a single motored engine and two motored engines
Okay.
all at the same time off of a 5 amp pack. I don't recommend going above 5 amp because most of the electronics that are now being incorporated into the engines typically have a 5 amp maximum capacity. So in the event of a fault or a failure, or a derailment, as we might call it, you run the risk of blowing out the electronics with a direct short.
Yeah, and you were talking before the show about the risks of 15 amp transformers and the welding capabilities that those might have.
We were dealing with. There are transformers out there, even LGB. Well, they had a 12 amp. They're jumbo. Bridgeworks produces transformers, even some in excess of 20 amps.
Yeah.
That's all well and good if you understand what's going on and how to protect individual track loops. I don't want to get into that too deeply here tonight, which is why I'll make the recommendation if you're going to look for a good basic starter set. Keep in mind, too, if you're running more than 3 trains yourself, you probably have a problem just keeping an eye on all of them. Okay? So we'll leave the discussion at that point. A 5 amp transformer controller, as I call them, is a good middle of the road way to expand your hobby interest in that category. It'll help you with multiple motors, therefore multiple train engines, multiple track runs. You can run long trains if you're still dealing with one engine, and of course, as you get steeper grades, which increases the loads on the engines, it'll help satisfy the power needs there. Okay.
Yeah.
We'll move on to the issues from the starter set. So the first question on how to deal with how to connect your track then to your controllers if, as Bill Logan is saying, you don't want to use these lonely little starter set track connections. Okay. Well, these come with a 24 to 26 gauge set of wires with them. Are we okay on seeing details here?
Yeah.
Or do we need to go to side camera?
Let's try the other camera here.
Up there? Yeah, you can focus on there. Either way.
Okay. Either way, it's about the same, isn't it?
It looks like small wire. That's because it is small wire.
Yeah.
And what we're saying is you need to go to bigger wire. Okay. And that bigger wire typically we recommend is 12 gauge. Just like you run, and we pointed out maybe a little bit last week, your house wiring is ran with 12 gauge copper wire. Now, typically it is solid, being used inside the house. This is a two conductor wire I cut off the ground, forgive me, just to make a point here. Well, this is also 12 gauge wire that's used outdoors, and it's called landscape wire. You can get it at most of the home stores for that matter, but you can get it in larger volumes at the electrical distributors. It's still 12 gauge, but it's stranded. The wire itself is not solid. It's made up of individual strands of copper, and therefore it's much more flexible.
Right. I was just going to say,
this stuff don't bend real well. And
yeah,
when
you
it does
can never
bend,
wind
it stays
up.
Yeah,
you can never
right.
wind
This stuff
12 gauge like that.
Is purposely made for outdoor use, and being 12 gauge reduces something we call voltage drop when you're using higher amperage draws on it. This stuff that comes with the starter sets, well, it's not rated for any amperage for all intents and purposes. Certainly, it's only rated for what partial amperage comes for the controllers. It's not built to be put underground. In fact, it's not built to be out in the sun. Right. So you're kind of stuck at that point, aren't you? Because it's not UV. It will not put up with UV exposure.
Yeah.
It's really only intended for its point of an indoor starter set. Hint, hint. Okay. I will say the connectors that come with the starter sets can be adapted. I won't throw those out, but there's a lot of work involved. You got to re-drill them, solder them, and that. But they are a handy, convenient way to connect to the track if you don't want to use the preferred method that I use, that using the rail clamps here.
Right. Yeah. What I do is hook it right up to the split jaw rail clamps and clamp that to the track. Nice solid connection.
What I want to do is point out, okay, and this goes, if you'll bear with me, a little bit of drawing. Can you see me on the sidebar? We'll try to do this.
We'll do that.
Focus in a little bit.
Oh, okay. We practiced this earlier. I got to go to the other camera.
There we go. Okay. While he's doing that, I'm going to talk a moment too. All right. The starter set system, of course, with such a small loop of track only requires one wire connection. As soon as you get outdoors and you start talking, let's say 100 feet or 200 feet or even 1,000 feet of track, all that goes out the window. And that's why you're going to use larger wire and you're going to use multiple wire connections to the same track loop. Yeah, that's good. Let's see if we can do this. So if you have a 500-foot loop of track outdoors, and you got your controller transformer over here, unlike the starter set where you'll typically just connect the wire because it's 6 feet long and that's it, you don't want to do that, quite frankly, or you want to go ahead and provide multiple track connections from your controller transformer so that you even out the voltage drop along the main line. You can look at this small wire just like a pipe with water flowing through it. Because it's so small, it would only, if this was a pipe, it would only let a little bit of water through it, no matter how big the transformer on one end, no matter how many engines you got on your track on the other. The larger wire allows more current draw, or if you will, if we're doing the water comparison, more water to flow through the pipes here in the scheme of things. And by making multiple connections to the track, you also even out the voltage draw. Some folks go ahead, because of the convenience factor and the fact that the transformer is right next to the track, just connect between those locations. And then the second run, they say, well, I'll just run to the opposite end of the railroad, which you can do. It will work. It will be an improvement, but it's really not the ideal way to deal with voltage drop because you have such a short run here, let's say 6 feet, and here you got, well, let's say 50 feet. You're still going to achieve voltage drop along between the track nearest the transformer and the track farthest away from the transformer. As I say, what you want to do is just simply even the wire lengths out, no matter where your transformer, no matter where your track is. Pick the middle point of the track from the transformer location and run those wire connections evenly. So these should be 20, let's say 25 feet, and this should be 25 feet, okay? Don't do 6 and 50, do 25 and 25. All righty. And the other rule of thumb, every 100 feet, you should have a track connection. Okay, so if you have a 500-foot length of track run, you should probably have 4 to 5 track wiring connections along the length, evenly spaced out as best you can, as a rule of thumb. Sounds like a lot of wire, but in the end, it'll maintain constant voltage on the track no matter where the engines are at any particular time.
Hey, Bill, sorry to interrupt. Can you get a little closer to the mic? Some folks are having difficulties hearing you.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
I feel like breathing right down on it here.
Yeah.
Okay. Is that better?
It is. Yeah, it sounds a lot better.
All right. It's a little unidirectional here tonight. Okay. So enough of that. Let's get a few points made on terms of connecting to the track itself. Jeb mentioned the business of using we promote the use of rail clamps. Well, they're just as easily used to connect the track, even the large heavy duty 12 gauge wire to the track, by using the very same connectors that are connecting the track sections together. This is a eyelet that you can purchase at any of the Home Depot home stores, I should say, and that clamps on the ends of the bare copper wire and provides an easy mechanism for connecting to the rail clamp here. And therefore, you can run the wire adjacent to or even underneath the track. You can put the wire down before you put the track down in order to get the wire spacings right. Quite frankly, I still recommend keeping the wire separate from the track over time and running it parallel. It's easier to repair if in the future a problem develops with it. Okay. When you start looking at landscape wire, you're going to find out there's all sizes available. I recommend, okay, I'm just going to say the term 12 AWG. That stands for number 12 wire, American wire gauge. This stuff is stranded, it's copper, 2 conductor. The insulation on it is rated, well, the wire itself is actually rated for up to 20 amps, which is over above the Call of Duty here in terms of current carrying capacity. And it's also rated with regard to the insulation for up to 300 volts, which you shouldn't be using. But at least it's UL listed for that. And it can be buried, and it can also be used above ground. Okay. So it solves all the problems that the starter set wiring has associated with it. Real quick comment on voltage drop. For what is voltage drop? Well, simply put, the transformer has the capacity at the outputs to provide, let's say, 20 amps. 20 amps at, 5 amps at 20 volts. Again, back to the voltage drop. The current drops the further away you get from the transformer because of the resistance in the wire, the resistance in the track, the resistance in the rail clamps. And you can come up to a circumstance where at the opposite end, as I say, you may have only 10 or 12 volts maximum. And because of that, obviously the train will slow down considerably. And if you're pulling a lot of equipment, it may even come to a halt in the process. Okay. And people like consistent running on their equipment. So voltage drop is one of the key issues there. The other issue that may arise is that the motor still wants the voltage to remain constant, and there's a relationship between the current and the voltage. If the voltage drops, the amperage will increase. So back to my original statement, that 1 amp motor will actually start trying to draw under a low voltage condition more than 1 amp. And once again, that heats everything up, stresses the transformers, actually stresses the motors. The motors are rated, not rated either for higher amperage draw. And you just wear away at them as a result. So you want to control your voltage drop. And the way you control your voltage drop is making multiple connections with your wiring and using heavy enough gauge wire, the 12 gauge, to minimize the voltage drop in practical terms. Okay.
Yep. And the way to avoid all voltage drop is to use batteries, I guess.
Not fair. Not fair.
I know we got some battery people out there watching.
I'll comment
Cody,
this way.
I know you're out there.
On that, I'll comment this way too. Most all of us, very, very few garden railroaders jump right into the hobby on battery power,
right?
Unless they've been exposed to it through others already. For all the newbie types, you're going to use what the manufacturers provide you with, what we call analog power, just the transformer controller power through wiring into the track through the engine motors. And I recommend still to this day that you wire your railroad for that to start out with. What happens if someone else wants to bring their equipment over and they're not battery operated? They want to run on power, track power. So you keep the options open when you do that, and it allows you to build the railroad, I think, a little more solidly as a result.
We have a question from John. Is the low voltage wire that you would use for outdoor lighting?
Yes, it is exactly that. This is outdoor landscape lighting, light fixture wiring. And that's what it's sold into. So when you go into the home stores, just go to the low voltage lighting section and you'll find the wiring there.
Yeah.
It's only 2 conductor. There's no ground wire necessary because it's designed for DC systems, and DC systems do not require grounds in the low voltage category.
Right. Very good.
Okay. Well, okay, we're gonna.
We get a comment here about the battery. When your battery dies, you can voltage drop.
Batteries die with voltage drop also. Okay, so let's jump into the next piece of the puzzle here. So let's assume you got your wiring down, your track down, and I want to introduce the issue of track ballasting, not because it's maybe the best opportunity or the time to do that, but it lends itself to a few points we'll make a little bit later on with regard to track cleaning and switches, which are the topics we're going to try to plow through, and I got to get going here today.
Right. Yeah.
So, track ballasting. A lot of us, the debate in the hobby is, do you ballast the track or not? Well, it depends in part on what you provide as far as a roadbed. I don't want to get into roadbeds tonight. Therefore, I'm going to make an assumption that you'll want to ballast your track. Okay. And if you do, as we use here in the Midwest, because limestone is literally the stone du jour requirement here, we use a product that's referred to as number 9 crushed limestone. It's used in the landscape business mostly, but it also, let's see now, where are we at on those cameras?
Yeah, do you want to?
Let's try this up here.
Sorry.
So there's my finger for scale, right? All right, number 9 crushed limestone is bigger than the real railroad prototype, about twice as big. However, again, we were dealing with scale model railroads, and the compromise here is something large enough to hold the track in place and small enough to still look reasonable in scale. If you look at all of the track that's pre-done by the manufacturers, and even if you use the flexible long track, you're going to see the back side is open, and it's open for a purpose. The purpose of that is to settle in to ballasted roadbed.
I thought they were just saving plastic.
It might have been.
It might have
but
been,
it
yeah.
serves a dual purpose.
It works anyways.
Yeah. So you take advantage of that with regard to the ballast business. And let's see, we're homing in up here.
Yeah.
Here. Okay, I'm gonna move over.
Yeah, move over that way. There you go.
There we go.
And this is where the mess begins.
Yeah,
folks.
yeah. This is the fun part.
We're
Okay. So in its basic form, ballast goes down. I use a large 4-inch paintbrush to scoot it along and settle it in below and up to the top of the tie level. Okay. Now, as you can see, it's a little bit. When you're outdoors along the railroad itself, there we go. You can begin to start seeing the tops of the ties. Then there you can stop at that point, because then the ballast is low enough it won't catch your equipment when you run it complements of the flanges. David, are we still good on hearing?
Yeah, you kind of go in and out a little bit, but yeah, you're good right now.
Okay. So doesn't hit the flanges, but still covers the track, still locks it into place, just like the real railroads do. Okay. And it looks like real ballast because it's crushed limestone, folks. Same stuff that the railroads tend to use.
I do seem to remember a warning from our master gardener. I'll just call her Mrs. D. She knows who I'm talking about. Her mentioning that because limestone is very alkaline, it can, if you're trying to also grow plants in the garden, it can cause problem because a lot of your plants like a little acidity.
Right.
So it's something to be aware of. I find the sedum doesn't seem to care. It loves any kind of thing you want to grow. And
my recommendation is to settle the ballast in with beer, not in you, but on the ballast, and that'll start the growing process, whether it's limestone or not.
Okay. Good idea.
Hey, Bill, one thing I'll just add is I had never bought like number 9 or number 8 limestone before. So they don't sell it at the big box stores, at least around here. So I had to go to a place where they sell like landscaping stone and that kind of stuff. And you walk inside and they had it on display where I ended up getting a 5-gallon bucket and they filled it up for me. So if you've never bought this stuff before, that's how I had to go about it.
Typically here in the Central Ohio area, Kirk's Brothers, Ohio Mulch handles it. Literally, it's used in the construction business and the landscaping business. And we usually do take a 5-gallon pail over. I think for us around here, a 5-gallon pail costs us $2 on the heavy side. And it's it's usually sold by the cubic yard. And it's roughly about these days, it's $25 a cubic yard. And trust me, a cubic yard of ballast will do you and half the club's railroad for a good period of time.
Yeah, I'm putting up on the share screen here, Semco Outdoors. There's a place down over in Gahanna, and you can fill up the back of your car with all the buckets you got and get out of there for about $10 to $15. So it's pretty cheap.
There are other ballast materials I will mention. There is obviously crushed granite, which is sold in the Landmark feed stores, and the chickens eat it as their digestive system uses the granite to crush up their food and go from there. I don't want to get into that too far. And therefore, it doesn't have the basic problem that maybe some people might be concerned with. And it typically is finer. And there is a bit of a problem associated with it as a result. All of this stuff, when it rains, it pours. And this material is large enough in scale that it tends to stay and lock itself into the track like the real railroad product does. Whereas the granite is so small, it's about 1/3 the size of this. It almost looks like kitty litter. And it literally blows off the track when it rains heavy, simply because the grains are too small individually. I see we got a visitor.
Oh, we got a visitor. Hang on.
There we go. So something to keep in mind there. I'm noticing too, there's on the screen for me, there is a autoplay indicator. Does that show up on the main screen?
In auto what?
Yeah, it may be just on this computer here. We're good. Okay. So for those who are maybe concerned, by the way, how often do you have to ballast? Definitely in the spring, at least once during the summer. So it goes back to one of the track basics we mentioned last week. Don't design your railroad and place track where you cannot get to it readily, okay? Because you need to ballast and you need to have access to ballast. And our feet are not scale. So that becomes an issue.
I used a little bit of wood glue to hold down, weather resistant wood glue to kind of hold down some spots, and watered down the glue where it's a little more difficult and I don't want to climb in to always reballast areas. Yeah, I did it last year, and it still looked pretty good through the fall with all the different rains we had. So
yeah, we've continued to try
it-
different products. I've used a product called Poly-V. It's a cement binder, and it stabilizes. It's a polyacrylic material. It's therefore flexible enough to stay where you put it and lock the ballast in to a point. But do keep in mind the stuff will
yeah, no matter what,
it will
it's-
regress back after a while. You start out with it looking like this, and eventually the ballast all sinks down. My railroad's been there since 1991. I ballasted it every year, and the track is still where I put it. And that only implies to me that somewhere underneath that track is about 12 to 14 inches worth of ballast.
down in China.
Yeah.
They've got
So it's all there.
It's
It's just,
coming from.
that's the way it works. In the scheme of things. And what this does, by the way, it stabilizes the track, holds the track in place, but still allows the track to flex because it is outdoors. It has to put up a freeze thaw in the freeze thaw zones. Not maybe something you have to deal with further south, but certainly for our area here and further north, you do have to.
Yeah.
So there's all of that.
Especially this time of year where it's in the teens at night and up in the 40s and 50s in the day. There's a lot of flexing going on, and the freezing, if it's raining at all, definitely wants to bust up any work you've done last year.
I'll bring the issue of track ballast back up in a little bit while when we deal with switches, because here we recommend you do ballast the track. When we get to switches, I may take back a few of my statements because there's areas of switches you don't want to ballast because they'll constantly drive you crazy as far as interfering with flanges. All right. Well, now that we put the track down, we've ballasted it. Now it's time to clean it after a week or two of being outside because the track is ultimately turned a bit dirty in the scheme of things.
Yeah, and this is I'll say before the show, we were on a pre-show talk. Bill scolded both David and I on our practices of how we clean tracks. So I guess we're gonna learn something here.
Go for it. Jed, in my defense, I learned it from you. So
I'm sorry. Sorry,
set me up.
I was using a product provided by LGB, and maybe it's not the optimum product to use. So.
All right. So on the topic of track cleaning and maintenance, okay, here's another piece of track I've just put down here. And unlike this nice, shiny new piece of track that came right out of the box of the starter sets, this has been outside for a while. And as you can see, all the brass is oxidized and turned a dark brown coating color. That color is an oxide, and that oxide is non-electrically conductive, therefore meaning the train will not run on it until it's clean. So the question becomes, how do you clean it? And when you're starting to talk a couple hundred, if not 1,000 feet of track, that becomes a major issue. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, certainly you want to clean the top of the rail because that's where the top of the rail and inside surface where the flange rubs are the two important points because that's where your electrical power pickup occurs for the equipment. You're going to wind up over time, not only with the oxide, which is the major electrical resistance issue, but you're obviously going to wind up with dirt. You're going to wind up with grease buildup. Well, quite frankly, bird droppings and squirrel dew, as I call it.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to also find that because your track is powered more often than not, ants. If you have ants in your territory, they love to walk on top of the rails. They're attracted to electromagnetic
just a minor
fields,
current. Yeah,
and the track provides that mechanism, and therefore, and of course, all ants is a way of their tracking leaves an acidic trail for all their fellow ant buddies to follow.
And when you run over it with your train,
and when you run over them with a train because they don't know what's going on, then you get the true ant issues. But all of that lends itself to the track degrading in its ability to conduct electricity to the train. So the question is, how in the heck we clean the blooming thing? Okay, I'm going to start out by giving you the absolute no, which I see a lot of people doing. Everybody's familiar with this. This is good old sandpaper. Okay,
yeah, thanks, Jed.
For grits.
Yeah, so 40 grit sandpaper is all bad.
And I even have to fault one of the major manufacturers who I, for the moment, maybe I'll remain nameless here. they actually offered, but it was intended for indoor use, so they weren't concerned with it. An actual a sanding block that was intended to clean track, and they still offer it. But again, you have to understand it was intended for indoor use, so the issue of oxidation is far, far less indoors than it is out. Why not sandpaper? Because sandpaper scratches the brass. It doesn't polish it. It's in the process of removing the oxide, which it will do. I won't disagree with that. But it scratches the brass, and then it oxidizes twice as fast as it did the first time. And so all you do is quickly produce the same problem over and over again. And ultimately, it wears away at the brass tracks faster than it would otherwise. So the question becomes, okay, well, what the heck do we use? All right, here's my recommendation. I have no affiliation with 3M at all. They just happen to produce a product that works best that I can see.
We will entertain offers from 3M.
Yes.
As a sponsorship.
3M wants to sponsor some more. Okay, this is what they refer to as their metal finishing pad. Again, available in most of the home stores. If not, you can sort of order it. I ordered through Ace Hardware in 10 packs because we use so much of it. The particular number, and this is the important piece, so you can copy that down, is model number 7414NA. Why? That's what 3M assigned it. Generically, it's what they refer to as their metal finishing pad, and it's a wine color. If you check with 3M when you go in the stores, they have all sorts of, quote, sanding products, all different colors. This is the only color they utilize for the metal finishing pad, fortunately. But I still recommend using that number, 7414NA, in order to obtain the correct product. All right, what do you do with it? Well, you put it on a sanding pad, okay, which you also can purchase at the home stores. Now, this is an interior drywall sanding pad, okay? It is intended for, oh yeah, sandpaper. But we're going to put the where am I at here? Yeah, there we go. We're going to put the metal finishing pad on it. And so when you get done monkeying around with the whole thing, you're going to wind up with this gizmo, okay? Sanding pad, metal finishing pad on it, and oh yeah, a $6 wooden stick in my case. Or if you want to go big time, you can spend $15 and get a fiberglass handle if you're feeling.
What about a carbon fiber one, maybe? If you're really,
I don't know if they have those yet, but I suppose someone will come up with that one.
That's right.
Okay, so what's the point of all this? The issues, and I'm going to take my handle off of this just to show that it does work.
You want me to hold the track?
No, I got it.
You got
We're
it.
good. Okay. So you're going to now pretend like you're outside and you got this pole sander and you're running it back and forth on the track. So what's the first thing you see? Well, it does start cleaning it. There you go. Right in here, it's starting to clean the oxide off. But you'll notice that's 7, 8, 9, 10 runs back and forth
in a 1 foot area.
In a 1 foot area, a lot of elbow grease required. But for it is one of the most effective means we have found to produce the cleaning effect and still not cause a heart attack, I think, in the scheme of things. Yeah. And you don't have to be down on your knees. You can stand up using the pole to do this.
And as long as your track is securely fastened to the ground in a few spots, so you're not pushing it over to the neighbor's yard.
Yeah. Tougher on bridges and that, but you can still get it to work. Yeah. All right. And in line with that, there's obviously other methods.
And how hard was the pressure you're putting down on that? You think just to like
nothing what to say. It's just hand pressure. Okay. Yeah. I'm not putting any weight per se on it.
Yeah. So you're not bearing down like a, what's that? Olympic
if you're persistent enough, you will eventually clean. This is the kind of job for all the young kids out there. Come spring, right? When you're going to start cleaning things.
Or you get the curling team to come over.
That's right. Yeah. But when you put your hand on it, it's not only clean, but it's also polished, metal finished. Okay. Not scratched.
I'll say. I mean, I'm going to go to this method here, Bill. I will throw away my LGB the sander, and I'll have to see if my polishing lasts longer than the sanding. Because I mean, I think the last time I really scrubbed down my track was before Christmas, and then I ran this weekend without having to do any updates of cleaning my track. But I see your point absolutely.
I'll put another plug in then too. I didn't bring a piece with me. I think everybody's familiar with steel wool, which you can purchase at the hardware store. Not the soapy kind, not the Brillo business, just plain Jane steel wool. Yes, it will also clean and polish the rail, but I don't recommend it because it is, in fact, it is steel. It's a ferrous metal, and the motor magnets will pick that up. And eventually, you'll clog things up that way. So, no steel wool, no sandpaper. Stick with a metal finishing pad, please.
Yeah. Well, what's in a metal finishing pad? I mean, is that what's in it?
It is a polyfiber material that has the way it is manufactured. It does not, it polishes as opposed to scratches the metal material in there. What is it made of? Well, if I knew, I'd probably know. I'd have a handle on the patent for it too. and again, this here is.
Well, when 3M picks up a sponsorship of the show, we can have them on the show.
Yeah, we can tell the special formula for that.
Yeah.
Hey, Bill, would you ever use rubbing alcohol to clean your track?
Just so happens I was going to make a comment about that.
Oh, look at that.
Okay, yeah, he probably saw this off the side. Okay.
It's the other thing Jed told me. I want to make sure he's not telling me two wrong things.
There we go. Oh, I love how this is working out. All right. By the way, I probably should cover over the name. The name is not important. The fact of denatured alcohol, that's the important issue. This gets rid of the grease and the bird dew and the squirrel poo a lot quicker than just using the standard cleaning pad only. Okay. And therefore, and it's easy to dribble it onto.
Onto your cleaning.
There we go.
Yeah.
All you got to do, you can just literally pour it on here a little bit. Well, it doesn't take a lot, just to saturate the pad. And so it does dual duty. It not only polishes the metal, but cleans all the crud factor off. And therefore you get a lot longer usage out of the cleaning pad.
No pun intended with dual duty.
No, that's true. Yeah. And the denatured alcohol literally evaporates almost as soon as you put it on the track. So it does not leave a residue. Notorious residues.
And we have a question from Bob Duggan.
Hey, Bob
has
Duggan.
Bill ever used an electric sander?
Just so happens I have my electric sander with me.
I think Bill.
all these guys are leading.
Yeah,
on.
Bob's leading the show here now.
Other alternatives, or let us say supplements, to the metal, the pole sander, as we refer to it here. Okay, and I'll just jump right in on this. What are the means by which you can clean track? Okay, you can go to Harbor Freight, at least here in the Midwest. I picked this up on sale for $10. Mm-hmm. Yes, $10, ladies and gentlemen. Wow. It's electrically operated. It's not battery operated. Hence the reason for the lower cost, and therefore you have to have an extension cord. But hey, for $10, I'll sacrifice an extension cord. This is a vibrating palm sander, and it cleans the track with even less effort than the pole sander.
Yeah.
With the negative is you got to be down on you typically are down at track level, translated meaning on your knees, moving along the track lines to do this.
You could probably hook a pole up to that somehow.
I'll give the rest of the body politic the opportunity to come up with a pole arrangement for this that can be guided, and away you go. Okay, along with a cord. But yes, much easier on older backs. Can't say much easier on older knees, but is a much quicker. It will clean things far quicker than even the pole sander, and therefore that's recommended along the ways, and it's very inexpensive. However, there are, and of course, the problem of cleaning track outdoors and garden railroading has been with us ever since the hobby started. And once the manufacturers got away from just providing blocks of sandpaper, we got into the business of where are we at here? There we go.
Yeah, well,
Rail cleaning. LGB was one of the first manufacturers who came out with a motorized rail cleaning car. Okay, so what is this bugger? It is a standard electrically motorized engine.
gotcha. I'm going to come over there.
Okay. It's easy. With on the front end of it, a counter rotating abrasive set of wheels. And it literally scrubs the crud and factor off that way. Now, I must admit, it still takes multiple runs around the track to do that. And it is problematic still at switches, which we haven't really touched on, but will shortly. Okay. There's still the need I have found to manually get down at switch locations to clean.
Will that go
lines.
up a tracks with the rack rail, the cog rail?
Yeah, there's nothing
in the middle.
There's nothing in the middle that will interfere with rack rail operation if the rack rail's correctly located.
How about if it's
But if,
on mine, would that work?
Well, I digress because I move on now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just here the last year or two, Pico addressed the issue of track cleaning with a whole novel new approach. And this is their little what they call their clean machine. Once again, this little engine has, as part of what is normally considered the power pickup shoes, has little pads that fit over them. And those pads perform the abrasive function. And those pads are very similar to our metal finishing pad, by the way, not sandpaper.
And they just drag over the
They
surface.
literally just rub over the rails.
Yeah.
So this tray cleaner will, you'll have many, many multiple passes. I still would claim in the spring, after you've left the track set over wintertime and it's really oxidized, you're really going to wind up having to provide a much more either the palm sander approach or the pole sander issue to really get the oxidation off. But once it's off, then this kind of product works really great. And the other advantage they have, unlike the LGB engine, which requires track power, so it's a little counterintuitive. The track needs to be cleaned enough for the engine to run, but its purpose is to clean the track. So there are issues with that conceptually. This bugger runs off of batteries, whether it's running on track
or on your carpet,
or yes, as we say, across the table, or anywhere that it gets loose on you with. It has a battery pack.
It was like 6 AA batteries.
6 AA batteries that are in the front of it. The whole thing is very ingenious. That you can replace as it wears down and turn it on and let it run. There you go.
Now, it won't exactly work on a point-to-point because you got to turn it around every time.
Yeah, there's that issue.
Yeah,
but one of the sneaky things you'll find out, though, is that back to the cleaner pads, because they slide on and slide off of the pickup shoes, they'll operate on anybody else, on most pickup shoes for other equipment. So it isn't necessarily just limited to the little clean machine.
Oh.
If you buy a dozen of the replacement pads. Pico, I don't know if Pico would say, well, as long as you use it on our engines, we're happy with that. That's okay.
Yeah.
You understand, if you put the cleaning pad on the pickup shoe, then you lose the electrical
conductivity. So you have to pick up truly through the wheels.
So there's a give and take there.
Yeah. Now, if you have a good pickup through your wheels, that would still work. I mean,
there you go.
If it's not oxidized that much that you can still run. Yeah.
Hey, Bill, quick question before we move away from track cleaning. So over the summer during the open house, I was running my train for about 5 hours, which is the longest I'd ever run it before. And after about 2.5 hours, had an issue where like the wheels started slipping. And what I didn't realize is that it had a buildup of grease on it. And I think that's when I contacted Jed and he told me all the wrong information to clean my track. But just throwing that out there for like other new folks, I didn't even know that was an issue. So if you guys are running your trains for a long period of time and you start getting slipping, then that's where like the track cleaning would come in handy. And I used a cloth and rubbing alcohol to help clean up the track, and it worked pretty well. So.
Well, I guess certainly the denatured alcohol helps that process. But I will put a plug in. Okay, one of the things that I've used now, I don't necessarily purposely put it on the rails for the sake of being on the rails. I usually use it on the engine equipment and the trucks associated with the cars. But it's a product called CRC 226, and it simply is a electrically, well, they claim, and I have found it to be so, electrically conductive lubricant. Okay, it's a very light spray.
Yeah, it's almost like
material.
WD-40 consistency.
Almost like WD-40.
Yeah.
It puts a film on it. And one thing I will say about, quote, the film is it reduces the oxidation. Well, it keeps the oxidation from occurring as quickly as it would otherwise. Okay. Now, as the track weathers in the sun and rain and all those happy things occur, it obviously wears it off and you're right back where you started from. But it does provide an interim. Now, if you put too much of it on, like you put any kind of lubricant on too much, then you get back to what David's comment on, that the trains will start slipping and sliding with regard to the rails. I have found by putting it on the axles and the pickups and the trucks, to keep those elements both lubricated and moving freely, it tends to work its way onto the rail anyway, and away you go. So I'll leave that point there. I'm not necessarily recommending you wholly clean the rail and then put the product on it for that sake.
Yeah, if you're in a
But
tight pinch and you got a rail joint that's acting up on you and you can't, you can spray a little bit of that into that joint, and it will get you through your open house. You know, it's 11:30 and noontime is your open house, and you don't want to take apart your tracks. It is a good solution. I have used it, but on my very first open house, I probably used a little too much of it. And by late in the afternoon, all my trains were slipping. I only had 3 or 4 cars behind my trains, and it wouldn't even pull it. It just tracked the oil around so much. So beware of using too much.
We're going to jump then into the issue of switches, and we're going to tie this all together once we conclude this segment. Okay, normally, switches, turnouts, depending on your sophistication in terms of terminology, but either be that as it may, your normally first experience with turnouts then is associated with add-on elements associated with the starter sets. The typical 2-foot radius, 1-foot section track that comes with the starter sets typically matches the radius of the switch that's offered in starter set expansion packs. And they come typically 1 for sidings, 2 for parallel runaround tracks, things of that nature. Okay. The few basic points with regard to the composition of the switches. There's what are referred to as the points, which is the rail section that physically moves. How are we doing? We able to see what's going on here?
Mm-hmm.
The rail section, we're tied between the camera versus my ability to keep by the mic here. The points, the frog, the guardrails, the main rail, which is typically the straight track, and the curve section, which is the run out. And then everything else falls into the same kind of sectional categories. The back sides are again hollow. One important point, well, 2 points. In this case, with the starter set units, these come with manual switches. Okay, you just manually, you lean down while it's on the ground and you flip the switch, and it works great. And in the case of this product, which is LGB, Pico makes the same kind. Most of the manufacturers make it so that if you are running the engine through the switches in the opposite direction of the points, this way, that there is a spring action that allows the points to move. I make that point because some of the manufacturers, like in this case, Sunset Valley, who provide a more sophisticated scale-oriented piece of switch track, they have also a manual switch that operates almost identical to the prototype. But unfortunately, when you do it with that that solution, the rails are locked, and it will simply cause a derailment with the train entering in from the opposite direction of the points. Just a side issue, but it's something to keep in mind. The issue of electrical continuity, keep in mind that these point rails are movable and therefore not being fixed. Each of the manufacturers have utilized a different method to maintain electrical conductivity to those moving rails. In the case of LGB, they have a little brass jumper and a screw on the back side that actually is integrated into the rail for power continuity. Okay.
And don't forget the number 9 gravel is the perfect size to get lodged in there.
Oh well, yeah, I was going to get to that.
Are you okay? Sorry.
The other rails on the from the straight to the run out track also in this case have brass jumpers, and those brass jumpers are not screwed in, but they're actually soldered in to the rail. Now, why I mention all, and each of the manufacturers have a different slight variation on that theme, but essentially all of them tend to provide that kind of electrical continuity between the rail systems. All right, what does all that boil down to, and why do I make point of it? Well, okay, over time, you have to gain access to that because eventually it all fails.
Yeah.
Or gets clogged up or breaks or whatever happens due to expansion and contraction and all that kind of stuff. And what that means, back to the beginning of our first workshop on the issue, the rail clamp issue becomes very important because you have to be able to remove those switches out of the track plan in order to gain access to the underneath side of them.
Yep.
Okay. And the slider systems that come normally with the sets, absolutely, you'll have to cut them in half or destroy them by removing them.
Yeah.
Whereas the rail clamps, you just unloosen them, the rail comes out,
you can pull it right out
and right back to there you go again. So another plus for rail clamps. Okay,
absolutely
in the scheme of things. Continuing on, this switch here, which is also by LGB Markman, has all the same components I mentioned in the smaller switch, but obviously has a much larger radius. And this is the 4-foot radius, 8-foot track component that we recommend for larger equipment.
Yeah, hold the 2 up in front of the laptop camera so
Okay.
they can really see the difference. Yeah, you can
literally.
It just creates a much more gentle curve.
Much more gentle curve, all the same components, all the same functionality. In this case, for the larger switch, this is actually an electrical.
Which are fun in themselves.
Yes. They still allow you to manually, you can still move the rail manually, but are intended through an electromagnet inside the switch machine be operated through a toggle switch on-off type of either a 3-way or a single-way toggle in order to flip the rail points from one side to the other. Okay, so there's one other means of which you can control the switch points on a switch that is normally available in the market. I'll just mention it so we can say we've claimed we touched base on it. I don't have an example of it with me tonight, but it's pneumatic.
Oh,
it
yeah.
uses air, compressed air. And there's one manufacturer out there still that utilizes, or you have access to it. And it's actually through the same company, Sunset Valley, that I mentioned earlier, that has the more prototype switching systems that uses a much closer to prototype manual switch. They also offer a compressed air switch.
Yeah, Bob Collins has that on his railroad, and I think he's had it for years, and it's been very successful.
The advantage to the air switch over the electrical switch, these require the switch to complete the entire movement so that it stops the electromagnet from pulling on the rail. If it gets caught halfway between, like if there's a piece of ballast in there, which we'll touch on in a moment, then it still continues drawing power.
So it doesn't have enough power to crush.
No, it doesn't have enough
to
crush the stone, and it doesn't have enough power to shut itself off. And
so
and
it will just sit there
tend
and
to
shudder.
burn it, yes, until you clear the foul. Whereas the air switch doesn't care. If it gets hung up halfway between, it's just air.
Yeah.
And there's no harm, no foul with regard to the switch machine. Now you still have a problem with the rails,
right?
In the
getting
sense
a train through it. Yeah,
getting a train through. So anyway, there's the three main systems out there.
And I'll just also add on. Bob says his air tank reservoir. I think it's just a 5-gallon tank that he uses, and it lasts all day.
Yeah.
Yep.
So those products are out there and available. These the manual and the electromagnetic switches are typical through the major manufacturers. Pico's uses the same basic concept as the LGB product, except they have a much more robust enclosure to resist the inevitable problem of water that occurs outdoors. Quite honestly, the LGB switch is outdoor rated, but it definitely works, but it doesn't work indefinitely. How's that? Yeah. Water can find its way into this product easier than the Pico product. Okay.
But for usage long term, lots and lots of usage, I don't think you'll find a single commercial display that will have switches in it. Is that kind of correct for the most part? I mean, none of your commercial layouts, I don't recall, like at Eastern, don't have switches. I mean, there's no reason to.
But. For commercial railroads whose intent is to run and see trains run, we have resisted the temptation to incorporate switches in those displays, because if there is 9 times out of 10, if you're going to have a problem, it's going to occur at the switch.
Yeah.
And couple that with the mechanical operation of the device lends itself to that problem even more so.
Right. But for home use, they're a lot of fun.
Yeah, for a home railroad, if you don't incorporate switches, you're losing out on an incredible amount of functionality in the larger picture of things here.
Yeah.
And everybody has to have some level of frustration, and that's and that's one of them. Okay. There you go. There are also, beyond the 4 major manufacturers, just like the track we mentioned last week, the classic, what I call aftermarket suppliers, AccuCraft, Proline, Sunset Valley, and Yagas Creek, all offer maybe more prototype products, but that's all that's mainly what they're manufacturing is track in those regards. Okay. Last component then is allowing the issue of maintenance on the switches. How do you either clean and or maintain the switches? Well, I've already made the major point that you have to simply be able to remove the switch from the track plan at some point, because something is going to fail, and part of that failure tends to be on the back side, not the easily gotten to front side. Mm-hmm. Obviously, on a day-to-day basis, the business of incorporating the business of incorporating our ballast that we showed you earlier on the standard track section. When you cover that switch over doing the same thing, you create a myriad of problems. You get ballast down between the guardrails, in the frogs, and obviously the worst condition of all is in the points itself, which is an absolute no-no. A number of railroads, even though we do ballast, we've typically shied away from putting ballast at the switches. And if we do a very light coat, so it's completely down inside the ties.
Right.
The switches are robust enough and heavy enough that they tend to stay where they are, and they're guided by the track points, the sections that are coming into them.
Yeah. So
they tend to stay where they're put. But on a normal maintenance basis, how you have to clean these things if you do ballast, I typically wind up either using my rail clamp, screwdriver, or a lot of us have in there. A standard little screwdriver.
Is that the one thing you forgot to bring tonight?
No, I had it, but the problem is it's so small. It's found its way out of my sight at the moment. A standard, a small scale Phillips combination spade screwdriver in order to run through. So I'm going to use the rail clamp product here, rail clamp screwdriver, that you can run through the frogs, the guardrails, and most importantly, the tail pieces in order to clear any fouls. And understand, we're not just talking ballast at that point. We're talking dirt, we're talking leaves, we're talking any other kind of debris that will inevitably find their way there.
Yep.
And so inevitably, when you start out, and particularly in the spring, it's inevitable that you have to gain access to all your switches in order to clean all those little parts out, certainly initially. And maybe later on, the track running your trains will keep them clear for the most part. But initially, you got to gain access to it. Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions come in on that?
All right. Our viewers out there, if you have any questions for Bill or Dave or myself, of course.
Well,
okay,
so,
I've been getting ridden hard all night here about my cleaning. So don't ask me about track cleaning.
So you're double thinking. You're not only thinking about running the program, but also your own personal circumstances with the railroad.
Yeah.
Okay.
Andrew wants to know if you're going to hold up the kitchen sink here.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet. That's the next workshop.
Okay. How to clean your kitchen sink.
There you go. Okay.
So
at the conclusion here, then I'm going to jump down to my track do nots rather than track do's. We've touched on many do's, now a few don't.
Okay.
Right. We've mentioned those already, but number one in the list is do not generate an S curve. I don't care what the radius is. Do not do that. All right. Now, you say, well, how do I not do that? Well, you plan ahead and make sure that there is at least a full track section between the S curve elements in order to allow the equipment to ease into the opposite curve. Okay. Item number one. So many railroads have created so many problems with S curves.
Yeah. Dave and I are both raising our hands right now. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm guilty.
All right. I've already talked particularly because of the switches tonight, but it is worth mentioning again. Do not put your track in an inaccessible place. Okay. Because at some point, for some reason, you have got to gain access to all the track. It's not only just in this installation, but as a maintenance issue.
Yeah.
And if there's any place that a train's going to derail, I can guarantee you it will be in the most inaccessible place on the railroad.
Right.
On average.
Don't make a 12-foot tunnel that has no access ports in it.
Yeah. See, we haven't talked about tunnels yet, technically. But yes, the rule of tunnels are do not generate a tunnel longer than your arm's length can get into both ends of it and meet in the middle. Now, you can do that, but that requires an access hatch or multiple access hatches for that. Yeah. Because I can guarantee you that's exactly where the train will derail. Out at Easton, we use the tunnels as our nighttime resting location.
Yeah.
Out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah.
And routinely, particularly in the spring, animals like our friendly neighborhood raccoons decide that those are hunky-dory places to stick around or travel from one location to another on, and will go ahead and work their fat bodies down through the tunnels, knocking the entire train off the track inside the tunnel.
Inside, yeah. I got groundhogs at my place.
Be forewarned there. All right, we started last week indicating we recommend grades no steeper than 3%, which sounds okay, but is really hard to get. Here's a 4-foot piece of track in front of me, and therefore you can that 4-foot length shouldn't be more than 1 inch and 3/16 from level from one end to the other. And that is not a whole lot of difference. But trust me, it makes a lot of difference in the ability of the trains to both run and, more importantly, to pull longer trains.
Unless you like using cog trains.
Unless you're using cog trains or engines that have multiple traction tires on them.
Yeah.
In the scheme of things. No unsupported track. All right. Well, what does unsupported track mean? Well, okay. I find a lot of people out there, back to my, I'm going to do an S curve here, where track sections come together. That's a weak point. If the track is going to break or bend, that's where it's going to occur, most likely. And therefore, it needs support. I've seen railroads, and they are effective and they can work, solely support. In fact, if you get trestle sets, I think even LGB and Pico sell them, that are intended mostly for indoor use, but okay, you can use them outdoors. Support the tracks at the section ends only. The track is sturdy enough that it'll support the trains. It won't support you, and not much else on it.
Yeah.
But that's the weak point, and that's what you need to support mainly. Now, beyond that, and again, we don't want to get into roadbed yet, but we highly recommend, or I highly recommend, that the track is supported all along its length. Now, we talked about ballast tonight, and the ballast performs that function on a normal flat or on a normal ground basis.
Yeah.
So there's that issue. Okay, and then you get in the whole business of spacing, and there's all sorts of issues there. But no close track spacing. Well, what do we define as close track spacing? Typically, nothing closer than 7 inches on center, meaning the center of the rail to the center of the next rail. And that's typically if you're using straight track. Okay, 7 inches from here to here. Oh, there we are. 7 inches. One track to the other, center to center. Beyond that, like this piece here where I got a curve, and if the curve, you actually should be further away, another inch away on curves. Why? Because the equipment hangs over. And if you have two trains passing by each other in opposite directions, something's going to wind up banging into each other. Okay. And the same goes for tunnels. And any other kind of clearances, any kind of vertical clearances, you need to maintain at least that 3.5 inch off center line clearance. If it's straight track, and if it's curved track, it needs to be more. And the sharper the curve, the more that has to be. I'm not going to get into a whole series of tables on that, but you can get the basic drift on it.
Yeah, your best bet is, as you're setting it up, test your longest trains on your sharpest curves side by side and see what's hitting.
So Bill, you should have made this video 3 months ago when I started doing my track, because I'm counting all your do not do's that I have done. So I'm going to have some work in the spring.
Check.
Yeah.
All right. Are we good? Did we want to try to deal with a few images from David?
David, do you want to show you a couple of pictures of your do nots that
I don't, but we will. So
I mean, we could go through them real quick. We've already been about an hour and a half here, and
so as long as the viewers know, I did this only so they know what not to do. So can you see that, Jen?
No, you got to hit the share screen.
There we go. Fine.
Yeah, I still don't have it.
Okay. Well, it's waiting on me. I'm sorry.
Here, found mine.
There we go.
All right. So remember, this is rough because it's just starting off. There's a lot of work to do. But when Bill's talking about an S curve, he let me know, even though that's a 4-foot diameter or 8-foot radius piece is used, that S curve will probably cause me some issues. When he talks about track spacing on the curves and the straights, this is what I have going on here. It's probably a little bit too close, so I got that to look forward to. Tunnel clearances. I was smart enough to use my longest train car there, but you can see that the clearance is not really there. So with all the flex and everything that he's been talking about, that's going to cause me some issues. So Just a little bit of work to do. So that's about it. So I will get that back to you. Stop sharing my screen.
Oh,
could you see them all?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Room. Yeah. So yeah, we've got some work, and I think as soon as it's warm enough, we're gonna come over to your house and work through a Wednesday Workbench Wednesday show at your house, and we'll just go through some potential pitfalls, and I think that would be good. But I think you've got some great work that you've been doing there, and I really believe by the July meeting this year.
Yeah.
So you'll be in good shape by July. You'll get a lot of work done. And you're working every day. It's nice outside. So
yeah. And for the sake of our viewers, I'll keep doing things wrong. So when you guys come, it's you get your bang for your buck there.
Yeah. So, well, I've kind of heard a nice little motto that I'm going to promote for trains this year is get out and run in 21. So let's get out and run our trains. And
very good.
Thanks everybody for joining in on our meeting. I do have a special end of show train running here from Franklin Park Conservatory. This was the last weekend of the Paul Bussey Garden Railroad display. And since early fall, they've been running it at night with all the lights on, and it's set up for a very nice Christmas display. And I made a little video for the end of our show. I will post it as a separate video on our YouTube channel, so you don't have to watch an hour and a half show to get to the railroad 5-minute video here. So we'll be back in 2 weeks. We don't know what our show is yet. We were just discussing what are we going to do. But in the meantime, if I want to really address this, Andrew has a show, Large Scale Consolidated, and it's a great show. They do it live on Friday nights, and there is a show coming up not this Friday but the next Friday, and Mr. Pictavid is the owner of that show. He and I believe his partner is Sean, and they do a great show, and I highly recommend getting out and looking at it. Here's their logo, so when you see that, watch their show. It's great stuff. All right, I'm gonna figure out how to get back here. All right, so let's wrap up our show here. Any last comments, Bill?
Well, we'll look forward to discussing transformers / controllers, which are the next expansion from the starter set business. What to deal with, mostly in analog. We'll start the discussion on the other alternative ways to control the railroad, DCC, digital command control, as well as battery operation, which seems to be the favored operation, certainly out on the West Coast by the West Coast crowd here. So we'll touch base on that. We may not go into extreme depth on that yet, but we'll continue this process in that category.
Sounds good. Well, thanks for joining us on our show, and enjoy the Franklin Park trains. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Good night, guys.
See you guys.